the meat of the work. Go, Shane.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And so you guys are going to be looking at my screen right about now. We hope. Looking good? All right. Excellent. So as we say here on the slide, we're calling this Rethinking Strategic Planning. And kind of the idea here is that the work that Tanya has been referencing has been really kicked off in the last couple of years in partnership with ICMA. And the premise of our work is that the kind of modern world has, I guess, characteristics, forces that have demanded that local governments rethink their approach to many aspects of public finance. But specifically today, we're going to talk here about strategic planning. And what might those forces be, you could be asking. So there's a few negative forces, so kind of threats, if you will, that cause the need for this rethinking. Number one, stagnant or diminishing resources. So local government tax bases not growing as quickly as they have in the past, for example. And when you have diminishing resources, conflict is going to be more likely because the traditional approach is that you can kind of spread the wealth around to different folks, and that helps reduce conflict. If the tax base is not growing like it used to, or at the same speed that it used to, harder to follow that strategy. The next point is increased conflict, political polarization being probably a very obvious example that we can all appreciate. And then the last force I'll cover here is volatility. And what I've gotten this graph is this shows the increase in digital data generated since 2010, and you can see it follows this exponential curve. And if I were to take this graph back to 2000, it still follows the same exponential sort of growth curve. And what that means is that this increasing, vastly increasing array of information just makes the world less predictable because there's people are influenced much more quickly. There can be much sharper turns in public opinion, much more rapid changes in belief systems, and then local governments have to be able to adapt to that as they move forward. Now, this is, I guess, the very beginning of your day here, so I don't want to depress you too much. So there are also some positive forces for rethinking that I want to go over with you, or in other words, opportunities to do things better and differently. Number one is better knowledge of how people make decisions. So kind of the traditional approach, there was an underlying assumption that people are rational decision makers. And if you think about like your traditional local government budget, right, it's rows of numbers and columns of numbers, and we're kind of assuming people are going to read all that and make decisions based on all those rows and all those numbers. But we know now that people are what can be termed predictably irrational. And we can kind of use that information to design decision systems that are more in tune with how people actually make decisions in order to help organizations reach better decisions. Another point here is that there's more appreciation for the role of fairness in budget and planning. So we just saw on the prior slide and discussion of some of the equity work the county is doing. So that would be, I think, a very good example in that vein. And then the last point is that we have new and better mental models. And what is a mental model, you might ask? A mental model is just a way that we view the world and kind of how we think about the way things work. So with that in mind, what is the traditional or typical approach to how we see planning and budgeting work? What does that process look like? Well, traditional mental model is get your piece of the pie, because if you don't, the next guy will. And as you could imagine, that's probably not a very sustainable approach, and we can take it a bit further in terms of sophistication with a different metaphor called the tragedy of the commons. And this metaphor comes from economics, and I'll go through it with you right now. So it goes like this. You've got a grazing area that is commonly owned by all of the farmers who surround it. So in our little picture here, farmers A, B, C, and D all commonly own or collectively own this grazing area. And because they all own it together, they all have the same incentive, which is get your animals onto that grazing area as much as possible, because if you don't, the next guy will. So your animals will be sitting at home doing nothing while all the others are out on the grazing area getting fat and happy. So everyone has this incentive, send your animals onto the grazing area as much as possible. They all do this. And the result is the tragedy of the commons, where the grazing area is eventually overgrazed and becomes useless. So the premise of GFOA's work here is that the local government planning and budgeting system has some similarities to the tragedy of the commons. You've got a local government budget that is effectively owned by all the different stakeholder groups, which include departments, members of the public, and so on. And they all have that same incentive, which is to get your piece of the budget, because if you don't, the next guy will. And the result is the tragedy of the local government budget, where the local government budget can become strained over time and financial distress ensues. So now the good news is that there is a Nobel Prize winning body of work about how to solve natural common pool or common resource problems in the natural world. So like water rights, fishing, forests, that sort of thing. So GFOA took all that work and translated it out to public finance and then proved it, the utility of this with many different case studies of local governments from across the country of different sizes and types. And this framework is called the Financial Foundations Framework, and we've got it up here on the screen. And there are 5 pillars to having a financially sustainable decision-making system that also leads to a thriving community. And I'll just kind of go through the pillars very quickly here. You've got pillar number 1, which is establish a long-term vision, I think is very much related to the work the county is doing here with strategic planning. And a vision, very important, right? Because you can imagine with our farmers, if the farmers are only focused on tomorrow, they're not going to be putting a whole lot of thought into how to sustain that grazing area over time. But if they have a vision for the long term, they're going to be more likely to take the steps necessary to preserve their grazing area and thrive together as a group. Build trust and open communication. So in order to, for those farmers to be able to work together, they need to be able to trust each other and communicate openly. Collaborative decision-making means that a decision that is the farmers come to together is going to be more likely to succeed and last than one imposed by the outside or one that just a single farmer comes up with. Again, I think you can probably see the parallels to local government decision-making there pretty clearly. And then we have our pillar 4, which is clear rules. So you need rules on how the resource is going to be used. And then 5 is treat everyone fairly, because the idea here is that if somebody feels unfairly treated, they are at best not going to accept the decision, and at worst maybe seek to sabotage the entire system that produced that decision. So it's clearly not a good outcome. So the reason why we think this framework is important and why the mental models of the tragedy and commons is important is, I think, summed up by this slide. What it shows here, there's these 6 conditions for systems change. And in local government planning and budgeting, traditionally, we're pretty focused on that top row: financial policies, best practices, resource flows, budgeting, like that sort of stuff. Those are the structural, sort of above the waterline characteristics of a decision-making system. What we don't pay as much attention to are the things right below that: relationships and relationships and connections, power dynamics. And if you think about those 5 pillars we just saw, those absolutely touch relationships and connections and power dynamics. For example, we talked about trust and open communication. That's a relationship connection issue. We talked about clear rules. That's a power dynamics issue, right? And then at the bottom, we've got mental models. And that's, again, kind of summing up. We've got the old mental model is the zero-sum game, kind of get your piece of the pie, because if you don't, the next guy will, versus a financial foundations model, which looks at the local government as a shared resource and asks that we put in place decision-making systems that help us sustain that shared resource in the interest of a thriving community over the long term. So what we're going to do now is jump right into the immediate topic at hand, which is strategic planning. So Tanya mentioned that we have the various reports and research papers that we've developed over the last year as part of this project. And this is one of them, the Rethinking Strategic Planning. And a big part of our work is the premise that it's important for local government officials to be what we call chefs, not cooks. And the idea being is that a chef can understand the audience their audience's needs, the ingredients in hand, then develop a strategy or a meal that suits the environment or the situation. Whereas a cook just kind of follows a set of recipes and doesn't really have the ability to improvise. So in that spirit, we offer to you 6 design principles, and these design principles can then be customized to fit whatever the local conditions are in any local government. So we're going to focus on the 4 principles here that are in black, the 2 that are in green. We understand the county has already done a lot of good work in terms of equity and community engagement. So we aren't going to get into those 2 as much. We certainly have a lot of material on that if the county wants to dig in deeper at a later point, but just for the purpose today, we thought the greatest value would be found in the first 4. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who is going to talk about the idea of a rolling plan.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Shane, and thanks for that introduction and the overview. So I think if we picture our traditional approach to strategic planning, which you've probably done in the past, is you do your plan over a certain time period, and then you have a list of tasks, and then each year or each quarter you click off the tasks that you've completed. This is a different kind of approach, and we call it a rolling plan. Because I think it allows you to be more strategic, and it's a learning document. Shane, if you'll go to the next one. And so the goals are that you refine the strategies to consider changing conditions and priorities, and then you confirm the tactics, and you do that through your annual budget process. So we believe strategic plans should avoid being overly specific on long-term goals, because those long-term goals can be obsolete over time, especially in the rapidly changing environment that we've seen. Who could have predicted, if you did your strategic plan in 2019, that we'd have a pandemic? And so this approach to strategic planning allows you to be more flexible and nimble. Strategies should not be thought of as a straight line. So rather, you can make adjustments and tweaks along the way to address these changing conditions. And it should really precede your budgeting, and can really help inform your budgeting if done correctly. And so the goal each time you do your budget is not to create a new strategic plan, but it's rather to guide the budget process where resources should be allocated based on what you're learning as you're implementing. And I think this chart will really help demonstrate it. If we'll go to the next one, Shane. Oh, okay. And so what the rolling plan does do is it does not do is you don't change the vision. So you guys have worked well on having a good vision, and also when you define the problem, which we think is a necessary first step, and often people skip, you don't redefine the problem because you know what the problem is that you're trying to address. And then if you'll go to the next one, you'll see this. I think this does a good way of showing how the evolution to a rolling plan. So the traditional budget, there's really not a lot of strategy around it. As Shane described earlier, it's pretty much you fund stuff. And so you allocate resources, then you say, did you spend it? Did your revenue come in? Really no strategy around it. You move to the conventional approach to strategic planning, which is better than just doing your budget. But you put together this kind of fixed strategic plan, often 5 years, maybe 7 years. And then each year you do your budget and try to tie it to the strategic plan. Sometimes it's a forced tie because you try to cover everything, and we find that doesn't work either. Instead, if you go with the rolling plan initiative, you start with your vision, defining the problem you're trying to address, and then you're going to identify strategies and tactics. You allocate the resources to it, and as you're monitoring results, then you're learning from them. So the key here is that if you're not achieving something, it's not a way to blame or anything. It's really, what can we learn from this that we may need to change? And so I'll give you an example. And then, so with the rolling plan, you continue to refine your strategies, and you can do that through your budget process, through how you allocate resources. And I'll give you an example. In a city I was working with, we had a strategic goal to improve K-12 educational outcomes. It was a real challenge. We only had a 57% on-time graduation rate from high school. Whole community got together, we looked at it, we put together a cross-departmental team, schools, libraries, park and rec, social services. We did some research about where we could invest resources to move the needle in those areas. And if what we found from this formed a big area to concentrate on was third grade level reading. So we looked at the research, put in some traditional third grade level reading resources, changed the budget to address that, not just in schools, but in libraries and others. After the first year of implementation, the needle didn't move as far as we had expected to based on our research. So we looked at the data some more and realized that we didn't do enough around English as a second language. Because it was a refugee community, we had a lot of people where English was their second language, invested more there. We also realized that the summer slump had a bigger impact than we thought. So we worked with the libraries for additional resources so that they could have a summer reading program. With those investments, we saw the improvements accelerate. And then we continued each year to improve off of that, all with the goal of improving educational outcomes. Shannon, if you go to the next one.
All right, cool. I'll take it back over here. We're going to talk about accept uncertainty as our next design principle. And the idea here is fairly kind of, I think, straightforward, is that uncertainty is uncomfortable, right? And the traditional strategic plan offers the comfort of a structured process, but it really can't change the fact that the future is unknowable. And what we're saying here, though, is accepting uncertainty doesn't mean that you give up on planning or strategy. It just means that the planning approach has to accept our limited knowledge of the future and be able to kind of work with that. And a futurist, Amy Webb, there in that spirit, advocates that we dispense with this kind of idea of a timeline or a linear approach as our mental model to strategic planning, and think about time cones. In other words, an expansive adaptive approach, which is what we see on the slide here. And there's kind of three stages to this time cone. We've got the vision, which is over to the far right, which is your aspirational state for the community. So something broad enough that it can conform to changes in strategies over time, but and also conform also with new elected leadership, but not so broad as to be meaningless. So striking that balance. You've got 2 to 4 years is the strategy, and this defines the direction the organization is going to go in to achieve that vision. And we suggest 2 to 4 years as being the proper period, because if you get beyond 2 years, it's a little too fluid for tactics to be feasible. And 4 years often corresponds to the term of office for elected officials. And of course, the elected officials are key determinant of what the direction priorities are going to be. This is not to say you should never look ahead 4 years or more than 4 years ahead. Making a difference in the complex problems that local governments often deal with will usually require more than a 4-year perspective, but you can give special attention to that 2 to 4 year period. And then lastly, on this diagram we've got 1 to 2 years, the tactics, and tactics are going to be best where there's more certainty in the environment. And maybe this includes implementing new programs, abolishing obsolete or unaffordable programs, or maybe fine-tuning existing services. And this is the point where you get a direct connection to the budget with your tactics. It's not exactly the same thing as the budget. Tactics are putting strategies into action, and some actions are not going to fit neatly into the budget, but certainly there's a big overlap between what goes on here with your tactics and the budget. And another point I'll make here is the transformative power of visions in local governments. We've got one of our research reports is about networked enterprises. And the basic idea here is that local governments have a lot of ability to get things done beyond their own direct ability as a corporate entity. They have convening power, power to bring together other governments, nonprofits, for-profit organizations in the community to really all pull towards the same thing or work towards the same goal. And I have got in the slide here, San Bernardino County, California is a good example of this. In fact, they did some really excellent work where they realized as they were putting together their strategic plan that they had a big opportunity to go beyond a plan that was just the plan for the county government. And it was really a plan for the entire community within the county. And to do that, they pulled in the constituent municipalities. I think they had participation from all but one of the constituent municipalities. They brought in non-for-profits, they brought in the for-profit organizations. And I'll just give you an example here on the next slide to continue our education theme. And in the county government of San Bernardino is not responsible for education, but education was a big deal for the people that lived in San Bernardino County, as I suspect it is in Washington County. And San Bernardino County officials said, well, it is a big deal here, so we have to figure out what the strategic plan can do to advance education. So they brought in the school district to work with as partners. And they said, well, one of the things we're all interested in is on-time graduation rates. And so that's part of our vision. And one of the things we could do is a strategy to mitigate summer learning loss. And we can also then kind of look back to see where poor grades may predict problems and what can we do to create summer learning opportunities for those students who don't do as well. So maybe that's with the local libraries, or maybe another example that's not on this slide relates to also students coming to school ready to learn. So in other words, if you've come to school with concerns about your nutrition or your housing or what have you, right, it's going to be very difficult for a student to learn in school. Now, the school district is not a social service agency, so they have problems meeting that need, but guess who is a social service agency? San Bernardino County. So the county and the school district work together for the county to provide those wraparound services to help the students come to school ready to learn. And the school district was super enthusiastic about it, very positive about this partnership, and they were able to really make a difference in helping the school district kind of get to its goals of both graduation rate and third grade literacy. So some good examples there of how you can use the strategic planning process to bring together folks to make progress on issues that are of substantial interest to everyone in the community. I'm going to move on here to our next design principle, which is defining a problem. I think there's some relationships to what we just talked about. And basically the idea here is really summed up by this quote: is a problem not fully understood is unsolvable, and a problem that is fully understood is half solved. And it really kind of gets to the point I think Chris was also making earlier, that if you don't understand the root causes and just treat the symptoms, you will get suboptimal results. So just continuing with our education example, this is from a different community where they were looking at graduation rate, and they were following back the causal chain. And they realized that, well, kids that don't do well in high school math tend to not graduate. And then if you look further than that, like, well, you can see they're not doing well in junior high math either. So they put together a program called Grade 8.5, where students went to their local high school during the summer, not only to brush up on their math skills, but also to become more familiar with kind of how high school worked, right? Because it's very different from junior high. You have your own locker, you go from class to class, these bells. So kind of getting into the flow of it, to really kind of remove that as yet another thing for them to have to deal with as they get into like the full semester come the fall. And they even look back further in the chain to say, well, do we need to prepare kids before they even get to junior high so they can do well in junior high math? So it's really, this is a point of just following the causal chain backwards to find the root causes and addressing those root causes so that you can then get the best results. And then one more quote I'll leave you with on this design principle before we hand it back to Chris is: for every complex problem, there's an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. And so I think that kind of really gets to the point of taking the time to define the problem well as part of your planning process rather than jumping right to the solutions. So Chris, I'm going to hand it to you to talk about introducing constraints.
Thanks. Yeah, so our third principle is provide focus by introducing constraints. And it not only gives you focus, but constraints counterintuitively can also lead to more creativity and problem solving. So we'll go to the next one, Shane. And so this is taken right out of our paper. So 3 filters that you might use to provide constraints. First is legitimacy and support. Do you have political support for it? And here I would caution, it doesn't mean to abandon the difficult but necessary. What it may need is either perhaps a more incremental approach, or maybe a revisioning of how you would address a major problem. I'll give you an example. In the community where I worked, a big problem with flooding because it was in a valley, and of the 13 stormwater basins, 11 of them were polluted or impaired according to the EPA. For years talked about it, couldn't get a stormwater utility in place that would incent, getting rid of impervious surfaces and non-point source solution. Years and years, and I think because they approached it as, well, we can build our way out of it, so why not just, have more bonds? When we're able to change the focus to, well, no, it's not about building out, it's about changing behavior, and we want clean rivers and streams because we want our children to be able to play in those rivers and streams. Change the whole mindset and actually get the Chamber of Commerce and the business community to support a stormwater utility. And so the constraint was there for legitimacy and support, but we just changed the discussion about it and reframed it. So that's something you can do for some of your important ones. Operational capacity. There's an approach to budgeting where you figure out how much, we call it the price of government. You have a fixed amount of revenue coming in. You have to work within that boundary. Other things is, what's your operational capacity around it. An example, many communities want to have an ISO 1 rating for their fire department. It's an insurance rating because then you get lower commercial insurance fees. Well, to make that happen, it's not just the fire department. You have to have others working with you. About 40% of the score is based on your water supply. And so think about the full capacities as you're setting your goals. And then the last is public value. Here too, I think education is a great example. In the community I was in, really wanted to move the needle on education. Besides the 3rd grade level reading scores, also looked at something called the PALS score that kids take in kindergarten and 1st grade. Are they arriving to school ready to learn? And if not, we need to invest more in early childhood education. And then also on-time graduation rates. So by focusing on those 3 high-level scores, you could rally the whole community around it, around an issue of important public value. And I know you've talked about a lot of that in the values in the strategic planning you've done so far. Go to the next one. And then I think the other thing in this area is that if you can move from the concept of funding departments to funding programs and services, it creates a whole different dynamic. I'll give you an example. People don't say we want more public works, but if you say we want safe streets, it's a different mindset. And then when you're looking about if you want safe streets, then how do you make that happen? You have to have planning involved, public works involved, police involved, park and rec, perhaps others, because that's a service that people want, not just department. And so an example here I give you is from the city of Roanoke where I was, and you can see what they did. They had 6 major areas of service. This one is community safety, which isn't just police. It included inspections, it included other departments. And you can see this focus on prevention. So they actually did the strategy map around it. They had prevention, responsiveness, quality standards and laws, and communication. And over time wanted to put more resources into prevention because they thought it would have a bigger impact, but knew they couldn't do it all at once. But it gets prevention up there and focus on it. And then they went further from there to this idea of purchasing strategies. So as the departments put in there's actually bids for services to achieve these strategies, they were scored on several different factors. I'll just give you a couple of them. One, you get a higher score if you address multiple causal factors or outcomes. 3rd grade level reading is a good example. If you can address 3rd grade level reading, you increase educational outcomes, you reduce crime in the future, you also reduce the need for jail beds. They know there's a direct correlation there. If it has cross-departmental collaboration. So if you get together with other departments and work together on it, you're going to score higher. Creative reuse of existing resources, knowing that you have a limited amount. If you can redirect those for creative programs, you get a higher score. And exhibits data-driven decision-making. The whole idea is that your departments are actually going to use data and research as they're putting together their bids for these services. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Shane.
All right, thanks for that, Chris. We're going to then transition to our third and final section here. I'm going to welcome Katie to the stage, and Katie, you're going to chat with our friends here about connecting a strategy to budgeting and financial planning.
Yep. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Shane. I'm just going to kind of close us out here and talk a little bit again about, some of the, once you have this new sort of rethought strategic plan in place, and you're, again, have a rolling plan, all these other things that Chris and Shane just talked about, some of the benefits that kind of come as a result of that you will see then in your budgeting. So Shane, if you would switch to the next slide, there we go. So again, and Chris just touched on this, right? Kind of moving away from funding departments and line items. Now, right, once you've outlined your priorities through a rolling strategic plan process, you have much more meaningful conversations about what you're going to fund. So we're not going to be arguing about how much are we going to spend on travel, or how much are we going to spend on supplies, and how much are we going to spend on fuel, right? We're not having that level of conversation. You now can, when you're funding services and outcomes, you're having, again, much more meaningful, deeper conversations about how are the strategies and tactics that we're funding, are we meeting our goals? Are we achieving that vision? Where do we need to tweak things? So annually, when you're putting together that budget, again, you're having a much, what I would say, higher quality conversation, much more meaningful conversation about those things, rather than just kind of going back and forth and saying, how much did you spend on X or Y? I do want to point out, though, that, again, kind of going back to this idea of constraints, not everything is going to be reflected in your strategic plan, right? You've still got some basic sort of day-to-day operations that, you just need to take care of and fund. So again, part of what you're also going to want to do is kind of establish expected sort of service levels for those kinds of day-to-day operations. Don't forget about those, but again, you still want to kind of be thinking about those, setting goals for those as well. But again, you're just having these much more meaningful conversations about what you're going to fund going forward. The other thing I want to talk about, and Shane, if you'll move to the next slide, is again, having this strategic plan in place allows you to now, the way I think about this is build a budget system. Right, and Shane talked earlier about implementing a new, developing a new mental model for how we think about budgeting and getting away from that very, we're fighting over our piece of the pie, and that the financial foundations framework is that new mental model. But how do we get there, right? And I always think about this as we kind of have to build a new budget system. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about software, right? I'm not talking about a software system, although that certainly can help. But really what I'm talking about is how do you make budgeting a year-round activity? And it's not just about allocating dollars to line items, but that we're developing policies and procedures and an organizational culture that is supporting that vision, strategies, and tactics that you've outlined. So again, as an example, right, you can use the priorities from the strategic planning process to then develop criteria that you're going to use when you're evaluating capital improvement projects, or when you're evaluating operating budget requests, right? And then you're developing templates that can be used for how you're going to rate those things, right? This all kind of flows from that. And Shane, if you'll move to the next slide, I think this really kind of encapsulates what we're talking about, is why this rethought strategic planning process is needed, is because it really drives all these other things and that make up your budget system, right? So we've got here your conducting community engagement and understanding those needs and priorities and defining the problem, right? That all feeds into your strategic plan, which then drives all these other things that you're going to be doing, right? It's driving decisions you're making as part of your operating process. It's driving policy decisions you're going to make about different revenue sources, taxes, user fees. It's driving how you're going to look at and think about your long-term financial plan, driving decisions you're going to want to make about your capital improvement plan. So really just kind of wanting to show how central this is. And again, as you want to build that budget system and develop that new mental model, right, to support that thriving community, that the strategic plan is such a key role there. So again, just kind of, I mean, my little part of this is just really bringing it home and kind of making sure we're getting that point across. So that is kind of finishing things up. And I think now we're kind of ready to talk to you and answer some questions about anything you heard.
Commissioners, who has questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
I don't have, thank you, Chair. I don't have a question. I'm just, it just is very logical. Everything that you've said, everything that, all the progression pieces, everything makes sense. And I guess, and Tanya, this is really kind of directed at you, and it'd be interesting for me to look at this process and then see what our previous processes have been and where the disparities are. So that's just in my mind, it will make it more helpful for me as we look to make the changes to go forward.
Any other commissioners?
Yeah,
Commissioner Rogers.
I'll make a couple of comments. One, GFOA does a good job of financial reporting. This is a new component of their business that I don't customarily see or work with, and that's the more their strategic planning and their non-reporting side. So I'm used to your reporting side and all your GFOA checklists, and you do really a fine job of that. My few points are these. One, it's nice to talk about processes, and you did a very good job of answering the age-old question of how do you make understandable complex accounting principles. And as you know, you don't make the standards. GASB makes the standards, but you apply them in the GFOA, and you have your own models of how you display things. But are you going to develop tools? Because that's the important thing. We can talk about processes and then leave everybody to their own devices on how to get there. Or you as an organization with a lot of resources, maybe you can develop some tools on how to do this. Another point I would make is that, as you know, it depends on the size of the entity, the average financial statement presentation, not counting budget, because I know you got a budget award, but on the financial side, 100 pages is nothing for a certificated program in which you are giving an award. I mean, that's nothing for a report. There is no humanoid that really likes to read that stuff. There's a bunch of accountants who put it together, a bunch of accountants who audit it and review it. But I think even in professional circles, would be a comment that there needs to be some method of distilling that into a readable format. And so you hand somebody, and I can tell you I've worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of boards, they look at this and gloss over and say, okay, that's wonderful, but can you give it to me in kind of bite-sized pieces? So not only would I encourage you in your fine work, because you guys are a great organization, to give some tools, but figure out a way to distill it. And I know GASB is going to have their own opinion, and the American Institute of CPAs have their own opinion. But if there was some display of information that made some sense and more bite-sized, humanoid kind of reading. And then the last thing I would say to you, again, because this is very general, but very good, but very general, there is no barometer to measure good and bad. And I always say that's, if you're driving your car and all of a sudden the idiot light comes on, that's what I need. It says your oil needs to be changed, or you need gas, or whatever else ailments on the car. I take it down to the shop and they fix it. There is no idiot lights, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I mean, that's just a comment. There's no idiot lights that come on in regard to we got an issue. The closest I've seen and I think it was a firm in the Midwest. They developed some measurement, and with all my stuff, I probably could find it somewhere, in which they actually showed their governing bodies that they were engaged with what were trends, what was good, and what was bad. And so it was almost like, whoops, red light, green light, or caution light. And so I would encourage you to do those. So just to recap, tools are important. Strategy you're talking about is wonderful, but you've got to have tools to measure it. 2, display of information. How do you get it to a point that the average human being can digest it and saying, I don't care about the note disclosures in regard to long-term debt or, the variety of other GASB pronouncements that need to be, I just need to know some general information, and then maybe an expansion of the tools to show good, bad, cautionary. So that's my comments. Thanks.
I'll just mention, you'll be happy to know that one of our next phases for the Rethinking project is exactly what you're talking about in terms of making this information more digestible. We actually have a meeting next week with our project teams to start working towards demonstrations of, we'll say, making information far more accessible to the non-expert, because we 100% agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, and if I could comment, our approach is we do research best practices, but then we work with leading governments like yours to apply it, learn from it, tell those stories, so that so we're learning ourselves as we implement these. On a couple other things, I agree, the annual comprehensive financial report is a bear of a document for the average citizen, even for a financial person to understand. Something that we're working on is really encouraging folks to do popular annual financial reports, where you have some finances, but you really tell the story about your government. I mean, because I tell our members, you could have the best financial report in the world. You could have wonderful financial systems, but if you're not helping your community thrive, what good is it? So it's really when you marry the two. And I think too, with our approach to strategic planning, often you try to cover everything. And as Katie talked about, there are some basic things, and you provide those in your annual budget, but focus on the really strategic that you think is going to have the biggest impact on your community. And then I think that makes your strategic plan document more digestible also.
Can I add one more thing? And that is that the only comment, and this is rare for me to do it, because I have nothing but respect for your organization. You're wonderful on the reporting side of being good at offering technical advice, because as you know, once we decided to pay the GASB folks money, they didn't used to be in the old days, they have found that there is no amount of new pronouncements that they can't issue or expose people to. But so I'm not trying to be critical, but the one thing that you said that I might disagree a bit about is that different boards, as they get elected, they have different initiatives, and so these plans are fairly evergreen. That sounds correct on the surface, but it's like, the U.S. Constitution or a lot of other documents, there's some threads that make some sense. And so if this board, which is very good, I would say, in terms of understanding and being very articulate with their questions, as well as detailed in their view, if we were capable of doing it today, put in something, I think it has some sustainability in terms of, you might tweak the levers and you might say it has some, but the basic comments and principles will go forward if you develop sound principles. So maybe that's what you were saying and I misunderstood. But
Yes, I concur. So your basic vision, the problem you've decided that you're trying to address, absolutely. And then as you learn by trying to address those, that's where you may change tactics or put resources someplace else. But yes, there are some, especially that's what you're elected to do, to really help work with your citizens about what is the major thing that they want their government to provide to them. And that I would agree, that doesn't change annually or maybe even over the decades.
Commissioner Rogers, I do want to just let you and the board know relative to the popular annual financial report. that is on the horizon for Washington County. We did not have the capacity to undertake that this year. There is a program which is a partnership between GFOA and ELGL to provide graduate students kind of an internship opportunity to help kickstart that process. I will also share that one of the things that I was excited about in Greg Bunn's interview process is he actually implemented the popular annual financial report during his tenure at Deschutes County. So more to come on that.
Other commissioners?
Um,
Go ahead, Commissioner Fye.
I'll jump in. Commissioner Rogers, earlier I raised my hand because the last comment that you made was exactly my question around when the team was presenting the time cone power slide to try to figure out, we're elected by 4-year cycle, but yet as a county, we're a county administrator commissioner structured based on our charter. So that seemed to me a bit of a, every year or every 4 year with our investment strategy will change. That seems a little bit of a lot of work for our county administrator to always be investing something new as new people get elected to these positions. So I really appreciated the comment that you made, Commissioner Rogers, around pulling that out, teasing it out, because that was my question. Other than that, what are the best practices that you would recommend around that? I know you touched on a little bit that our tactics would change, but what are some solid best, to build into that sustainability that no matter who gets elected, that some of the social services that we provide, that the community deems necessary, whether, no matter whose political ideology is running the county, that the community will be safeguarded for those social services? What are some best practices? I know there's some social services I like to see the county implement, but that might not be financially feasible or sustainable in the future. So I'm just interested in hearing some of your best expertise on that, and for our viewing audience as well, for the community.
Sure, I can take a first crack at that. I think maybe it goes back to something Chris was saying, which was to start by identifying what are the big picture principles that you're looking to preserve and put in place. I'll give you an example. Like one of my favorite examples is San Antonio, and they've had a system that's gone through 3 changes in mayors. This is a kind of mayoral-led government, so that's a big deal, right? When you can survive 3 changes in mayoral administration. So how'd they do it? So number one is they put together the series of community priorities that are high level enough that there is some flexibility to change tactics, because you might have to change tactics, like again, if there's new elected officials, and more importantly, public policy is hard, right? Some things just do not work that you thought would work, and you have to be open to changing direction when you find that out. So broad enough to accommodate changes in direction, but also specific enough to have some meaning. So if we want to, for example, increase childhood literacy, right? That is specific enough that you can decide what exactly tactics and strategies might be appropriate to achieve that goal, but also broad enough that there's going to be some room to adjust in there. The other thing maybe I'll bring up in terms of sustaining through kind of over the long term is what I think the direction you guys are going is community engagement. So in San Antonio, they had something like 5,000 different San Antonians participate in this vision. So you could imagine that would be good for 2 things. Is number one, right? If it's a product of that many people, right, it's going to have just a lot of support in the community. Then actually, I think the mayor today actually got interested in government because he participated in that vision process. So it wasn't, oh, this is some other mayor's vision that I've come in for. This is like, well, this was my vision. I was one of those 5,000 San Antonians that actually participated in putting this together. They've also engaged a large number of nonprofits and for-profits in this vision. So it's not just the city vision. it's a vision that belongs to all these other organizations that are pretty influential in the community. So you can imagine it would be also awkward at best to jettison a vision that like the local United Way and like all the other big philanthropies and everyone else like are fully supportive of, right? So building this ecosystem of supporters is also, I think, both at the individual community member level and at the organization level are all some of the keys to having this thing sustainable over the long term. And Katie or Chris, if you had anything to add.
Yeah, if I could add also, I think and it's kind of implied to what Jane was saying, but I think data. So if you can use data to show the efficacy of what you're investing in, I'll give you one example. In the community I was in to address education, we increased the meals tax quite substantially by 40%. A little controversial, but then we reported monthly how much funds came in, where they went to, and then we showed the outcomes that improved. And so people then accepted it and actually built trust also for the next time we had to do something with revenue. So I think that will help you with long-term sustainability. You build trust by being transparent, data. And I think as Commissioner Rogers was talking about, you have to make it simple. It could be a scorecard with red light, green light, yellow light, and you explain it. But I think it's data in a way that it's understandable, and you report continuously and transparently. And when something's not working, you admit it, and you work on something else.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add to that our research on the kind of how organizations sustain the stuff. The scorecard is huge because it's a convening device, essentially. It's like a physical thing that people can see and say, oh, that's what we're doing, and this is the progress that we're making. So I definitely second that idea. And maybe just one other thing I'll add is San Bernardino County had a pretty cool approach too, where they had various issues that they recognized as being important to their county, and they developed these different committees to deal with each issue. But they had each committee, they went out of their way to make sure the committee chair was someone not from county government, because again, if you're going to have this like sustainable, they said, well, let's get like the local school district to head the one that's about education, or let's get, I think they had like a hospital to do the one on public health, and so on and so forth. And so the county participated as well, of course, but they were very deliberate about not only having the head of each committee from outside of county government, but then the committee members from different organizations from outside county government. So that really kind of helps kind of like integrate this thing to the community on a broader basis. And Katie, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, there was, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about sort of long-term sustainability and financial policies. And so I think, again, if you remember that slide I had that sort of said the strategic plan's at the center and sort of driving all these other things, I think one way you can make sure that the goals you're setting and the vision you're setting as part of your strategic planning process is also by then looking at your, not only financial policies, really your policies throughout the entire organization. And of course, at GFOA, we focus on financial policies, but there are things that you can look at in how you're collecting revenue and how you're charging users for different services. What are your, how are you considering equity when you're setting, fees for different things? How are you thinking about fines for different services, right? So there are a lot of things you can think about that at the top of your head. You might think, well, my financial policies aren't particularly strategic, but they really are, and can really connect back to that strategic plan and the goals and vision that you're setting there. And again, really becomes part of the organizational culture then. So I would, again, that's something I really nerd out about is financial policy. So I would really be remiss if I didn't mention that.
Wonderful, thank you. Commissioner Willie, go ahead.
Well, that last 5 minutes of discussion kind of sent me a little bit of a different direction than my initial thoughts. I mean, I was much more, first of all, I had to get over all that government accounting spiel that Roy likes to emulate out there. And so, talking about government auditing standards and all that stuff that I used to have to deal with and I don't anymore. So I'm loving that. Overall, a couple of takeaways I had was when we talk about, historically, we talk about developing a strategic plan, there's some old style methodologies that immediately pop into my brain as to what this is going to look like when we get done. So I have a tendency to fast forward to the finish line, which is not a good process. And then I think of a strategic plan from the county perspective when we're talking about, obviously, things that are going to significantly be impacted by financial constraints, and those things I try and put that aside as well, because I try to focus on and what impact would that have on a strategic plan. So we sit here today and put together a strategic plan that 4 years from now or 6 years from now, because we have opportunity for turnover every 2 years, someone comes in, a group comes in and says, we don't like that, we're going to change that. So again, putting together a strategic plan that has the kind of, I'll call it pillars, because that's what you use, that kind of sustains life into the next generations of certainly our leadership. So you've given me a much higher level perspective of what our task is when we start talking about a strategic plan. And there was one other thing that kind of interested me when you talked about funding. You talked about services and outcomes, not department line items. And I thought that was really good as well, because we've had conversations about certain departments that quite frankly are financially constrained, and we need to step back from that and say, what's our desired outcomes, and then how do we get there? And so not focusing on line item, how much money are you spending on X, but what's our desired outcome for each of our individual departments. So I don't know if that's a huge project that maybe we would get lost in the weeds. I would be concerned about that a little bit as well. But anyway, I look forward to going into our strategic plan, having a different perspective, and I guess being educated on a much higher level, and then working downwards so that we can put definition to what it is that we're trying to do. But to go back, for me, the strategic plan is county, and certainly we're going to be involved as commissioners a lot to that, but that falls also on Tanya and her ACAs that are going to be putting together a lot of that. But I'd like us as a board of commissioners to go back to the pillars that you communicated in your first few slides and identify a strategic plan that also reflects those pillars.
Can I pause for a second, Commissioner Treese? I know we have a hard stop at 10:30. It's 10 past now. I would like to have the opportunity to ask questions and share thoughts. Is there anything after our question and discussion that we need to finish by 10:30? Okay, terrific. So we still have time. Great. Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
I'm happy to. I've had one shot. I'm happy to go after you do, Chair.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
You go ahead.
Given the situations that you've described, that you've kind of created a colorful piece in relationship to what other organizations have done. Given where we are, what type of consulting services do you all offer to help us get through the strategic planning process, the budgeting process, and that type, and how and what type of services did you offer others?
I can take that one if you guys want. Wasn't a sales pitch, so I just put that out there. But but we have done long-term financial planning. We basically invented that a number of years back, and that has been our thing for quite a number of years. And our goal, quite frankly, as an organization is to like not be consultants, because we want to like get this stuff out in the world such that like other people could do it without us. So I'll give you a good example. We invented long-term financial planning, and we no longer really offer that service because it's so popular that there are just like whole like legions of consultants that can do this, and the world does not need us to do that. So we've moved on to kind of other types of things. So kind of our goal ultimately is to like help people do this without us. Certainly we can provide assistance, but our goal is to kind of like the teach to fish model, if that makes sense.
And if I could build off that, I mean, all of our resources are free on the web. You have a really talented team. I know just working with them, and we're always available to you know, if they want to run something by us or have some ideas. And then we would love, as you go through this, to learn from your experience and tell your story too.
And as Ms. Angie mentioned earlier, this is really an initial conversation with more to come, but it's really nice to hear the reflection from these 3 guest speakers around the caliber of the Washington County senior leaders and staff that will help us on this journey and be able to answer your question. I think, Commissioner Treese, at least I feel very confident in that. So I just have a few things. I'm really very excited about this and appreciated having both the opportunity of the articles available through your website, so good job there, as well as hearing from you today. Very, very effective and inspiring. I have had the opportunity to see and live at least 3 different area local governments utilizing their strategic plan and budgeting and community engagement processes. I have with varying degrees, right? One did a really great job in having an incredible vision and a strategic plan, and then revisiting that strategic plan. However, you know, and that vision and the initial strategic plan was created with a lot of community involvement. However, that subsequent, I'm referring to Exhibit 2 in the Rethinking Strategic Planning paper, you know, the rolling plan is initiated, right? And then that continuing rolling plan process over the course of time, they were definitely using those main boxes of refining strategies, confirming tactics, allocating resources, and monitoring results. But it seemed to me, and including when I was part of it, that the community engagement in that felt a little missing, right? And it felt more internally focused, externally impactful. So I was wondering, for that bottom section of that exhibit, where might we, is there not a tool, is there an article or something that highlights how some communities, you mentioned one, San Antonio, have ensured that their communities, that the strategies and the use of the rolling plan process has some community visibility? Because in another case, excuse me, I forgot to mention, in another case here in Washington County, there's a vision, there's a strategic plan, but over the course of time, it felt very much like a check the box. And there too, the community's been invited to celebratory events, presentations with red, green, blue, you know, presentations of how tactics are updated, but the spirit of excitement, the spirit of community ownership of those outcomes is a little bit missing. So that's one reason, based on those experiences and seeing our grand opportunity here, I'm wondering, where could I learn from?
Sure. Let's see if I go back to my screen, share here. Let's see how this will work. All right, you guys looking at my PowerPoint? Yes. This one would be a really good place to start. So that one goes through a few different examples. San Bernardino is in there, San Antonio is in there, a couple other places are in there, which I think get exactly to the question you're asking, as to how do you kind of have something like this, have that kind of take hold in the community and get people excited about it. So I would definitely recommend this as a starting point. And let me unshare. And I certainly will be able to send over the link. Maybe I could put that in the chat.
Yay, he's teaching me how to fish.
There you go. Exactly. Now, if I can only, someone needs to teach me to use Zoom. There we go. All right. So but yeah, and then we'll be happy to share that. And then we also have, like, the problem is we have a lot of research. I'm trying to think about, like, you know, to curate it for you. Like, all right, well, what's like the best? So that is good. And then I think if I'm also understanding the question, it's also like, how do you engage like the community in the conversation beyond, like, went a little deeper, and we have like a whole, we have a lot of stuff on that. So let me
It's
mull
not
over
for the initial part, right? That feels very familiar. It's that ongoing over time, and how we make sure that after we've gone through this initial plan development, you know, complex, right, multifaceted, that as we go through the rolling part of it, as a county government, we're making sure that community is there too.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good point. So I would think, yeah, definitely the one I put on screen would work out, or would be great. And then maybe just a couple other points I'll bring up from our research, kind of sneak preview, is kind of the metaphor that we use is like, it's like gardening, where you kind of have to curate your network. So that involves weeding sometimes, because it does happen that, like, you know, folks lose interest, right? They've kind of maybe you partner with like the local nonprofit XYZ, and they have a change in leadership, or otherwise like aren't as, you know, what they used to be. You know, there's a process of pruning where you say, well, all right, they're not really carrying their weight anymore. We're going to have to find like a new group to bring in, right? That does happen. And then this is one of my favorite quotes, is that leaderships of networks feels remarkably like nagging. So that is a kind of a real, I guess, part of developing these sorts of plans, is it does involve kind of, we'll just say, reminding folks of their commitments, to put it that way, and helping people, reminding them, shall we say, that to come along with the process and what they've agreed to do. So there are some, that paper gets into all these kind of lessons and best practices when it comes to managing networks and keeping them fresh on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. I just have two others I want to touch on, two other questions. Well, this one, well, I really appreciated the paper, Bridging Political Divides in Local Government. We've been going through transformation here as a community, and transformation here on the Board of Commissioners as well. And that's I think, useful recognition and a useful paper. It's one that I found in exploring your website and reading the cascade of papers. So that's one that I wanted to mention. And I look forward to giving that a more careful read. Then the last thing I wanted to touch on is, and this came out through some of my colleagues' questions as well. There are, to my first comment, on the different organizations, we each have different portfolios, right? We have, we here are a very large county, right? Metro, where I served for 12 years, encompasses a much larger area, but a much smaller portfolio, right? So the experience I had there with their strategic planning and budgeting process it felt a little easier to me. We have a very large portfolio here, just of county-wide services. And then in addition, we have here in Oregon, a very unique circumstance of 38% of our population, about 38%, living in urban unincorporated areas. And we are their quasi local government providing a few key services, but not all, with dedicated funding, right? So we have to be often careful that we're not conflating the two portfolio sets, because we have county-wide resources here, and we have very voter approved specific resources, but they are much more constrained. So as we go through this, there are times where we have to think about the outcomes with a county-wide lens versus that specialized responsibility that can be quite challenging. And as we go through a new community developed county strategic plan, we also have to figure out how to tee that up and talk about that, because it is complicated and it does affect things. And I want to mention, and this touches on the second aspect a little bit, Commissioner Rogers and I have, well, I'll just put it this way, though it's a little too stark. He and I have different value sets, but we often agree on a lot of outcomes and approaches, right? And this is where I really continue to learn a lot from him. You know, part of it is how he talks with me about it, right? We don't use our values as weapons in our conversations. Rather, we are focused on what our responsibility is as county commissioners in service to community. And so this is where I really appreciate the orientation of an outcomes-based approach. You know, what my colleagues often hear me use is phraseology around what are the desired outcomes that we're getting at. And then we're able to go from there, looking at framing, some of what you've talked about, and strategies and potential tactics. So I see us as a board. We were a new board as of my election in 2019. Along with Commissioners Willie and Treese joining, and then with Commissioner Fye joining us the beginning of 2021. So I'm hoping that the 5 of us will have our time together over the next 4+ years as we go through this multi-year process on the strategic plan and financial planning work. So as a result of listening to us, I'm bringing this to a close, sorry. In working particularly as Ms. Angie and her staff are your key contacts with her C-suite level team and executive team. As a result of hearing our questions and comments today, if there are other papers, for example, on your website that come to mind, please don't hesitate to mention those to her. And I will certainly be doing my best to digest those and utilize that information as we as a board go through our continued conversations with staff in the coming months. It's just, I find it so exciting and energizing. Thank you. That's all for me, folks.
Can I just, on behalf of GFOA and my colleagues, just thank you for inviting us. What a great experience. And I can tell by your questions, your passion and your commitment, and with the talented team that you have there on your staff, I know you guys are going to be doing great things. And so we're looking forward to see where you bring this, and always here, happy to help in any way that we can.
Ms. Angie, back to you.
Great.
Quick thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And feel free to drop off GFOA partners, because I know you have 2 minutes before your hard stop. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So today's conversation was really just a conversation and a learning experience. The team is currently working on, and really just wanted to hear from your board today, just your questions, so that we can start to put together next steps and proposed process. I know sometimes there's more thoughts that come up after a presentation too, so feel free to share those with me, and we will be scheduling time. I'll work with the chair either on scheduling time for future roundtable and or for work session to continue our conversation on strategic plan. The goal is to kick off the start of the planning process this calendar year.
Wonderful. So how's everybody doing? Are you a-okay with us? We have 2 more items before we had a planned lunch break. But I'm wondering if now with that vast array of information, if it might be good to at least take a shorter bio break before we head into the fiscal year reflections and initiatives. Is that okay? Okay. So can we come back in 10 minutes at 10:40? Okay, let's do that. See you back here then. Thank you. We're breaking for 10 minutes, not 15, just so you know. Okay, that was 10 minutes, folks. Doesn't do any good for me to sit here and be ready if I'm off camera and unmuted or not muted, whatever, muted. Okay, well, thanks for taking just a short break. For our board clerk, Ms. Niola, for this next piece, we're transitioning to the Board of Commissioners fiscal year 22-23 budget process reflections. Commissioners, you may recall that we had a similar exercise in a roundtable last summer. So for this year, I have created a note-taking document just to help kickstart the conversation. So Ms. Niola, I need your help because I need to be able to do a share screen.
Okay,
And I don't know if I'm set up to do that.
you should be able to. Do you want to try it?
Can you all see that?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you. Technology works. Do I need to zoom this, folks? Sorry, if you could give me audio.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. I will do that. So I just started this. I mean, this is just a start is my point. And in this section, it's interesting for me because I'm serving both as the facilitator and I'm a participant, right, as one of the board members. Right now, I am serving as a facilitator, okay? And in a few minutes, I'll come back as an individual. So right now I've got the hat on of serving as a facilitator. So here is just a draft to help start off our conversation. Just kicking things off, one of the things that I think we have progressed for each of these 3 cycles that 4 of us have been through together is with regard to changes in our community engagement. So we kicked it off in 2019 for that 19-20 budget. For the next cycle, we added, what is the budget, right? We had a primer on that. For both of those years, we switched to having evening meetings. We continued with the public hearing, but in that, in May of 2021, we had increased testimony. Oh, sorry, I got my years a little wrong. This is this year's budget. So for this cycle we've just gone through, we continue to have that front end community engagement, but we started talking about challenges up front a little bit more. We continued to have evening meetings, but what we added this year was public comment in those budget meetings. We also, I forgot to note, added or expanded the number of budget meetings. I remember Commissioner Treese, you helped us with that idea. And then of course, we continued to have the public hearing. And just a reminder, related to the 22-23 budget process, we have coming up for our Q3 town hall, reporting back to the community about how we utilized their input, their curiosity in moving from proposed budget into adopted budget. So that's just a starting point for our conversation to hear more about your budget process reflections. Similarly, we had some different engagement on the actual proposed budget and the presentation for that I think we experienced as well as our community. So our CAO presented the budget in public meetings, right? It wasn't her staff presenting solely. So we had the opportunity to continue our engagement with the CAO directly. The CAO also engaged with us as commissioners during the proposed budget formation around the conditions that we find ourselves in and the challenges that the agency was facing. We also, as a board, had the opportunity to hear from Ms. Angie how she was working with the senior staff in problem solving those very same things. And we certainly had the opportunity to see, as the One Washington County approach had been launched, how that was being used to ensure we were transitioning organizationally from department silos into One Washington County. And that was also, I think, observed by us through the problem solving, One Washington County problem solving. And that approach has been established for continued use out into the future. So I just have this as a starting point for our conversation, and I just offer that up to you as a starting point, but look forward to all of your contributions, and I will try and capture them here as well. Commissioner Treese, thank you. Go ahead. And at this juncture, I need to figure out how to move that over there so that I can hopefully, once you do a share screen, you can't, I can't, oh, yes, I can. There we go. Now I can see you all. Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
Well, I just want to make sure that in this, that we capture the budget equity tool, and we also capture the interpretation, that both the sign language interpretation and the language, the Spanish language interpreters. I also want to let's see. There was one other thing that I wanted to remind us that. Oh, I know what it was. We have the budget equity or the tools on the web, so where people could see the videos. So I think, you know, I just really believe strongly that the staff, the commission really worked to change this the budget process from you know, just a large spectrum, and I want to make sure that all those pieces get up there.
Yep. Thank you. Doing my best to be a decent note taker in process. So not always the greatest at it. I think I got it. Other commissioners, thoughts, comments? What'd you like about this past budget process that you'd like to see us consider into the moving forward? And maybe what are some of the things that you're thinking about? Well, maybe we want to do it differently next year. What are your thoughts? Oops, I lost Commissioner Willie.
I can still hear you.
Okie dokie.
I'm willing to volunteer a few things. One, I thought it was very clunky the way we did our hearings. In the old days, whatever that means, we used to take and advertise them all of them at a date certain. so that you didn't have this awkwardness, which we did with a number of them, where you would sit there and you had it for an hour and a half and they finished in 45 minutes. So we said, well, we'll see you in 45 minutes. It was, they should roll just like our commission roll from one to another to another. That would make the process go much easier. I also thought, and I'm not saying things are bad, everything. I'm just saying what I observed might be a little bit of improvement. It seemed like we had a lot of meetings to have meetings. And I know you can say, well, that's the public process. Not if the public isn't there. I like the night thing because I think people will participate versus day. Frankly, a lot of our population works, so they'll come at night. They won't necessarily come during the day. But maybe there's a variety or a mixture. I don't know. I would suggest that. And it seemed at times it wasn't, I don't want to say bifurcation because we had different meetings on different nights, and I'm not sure that they were exactly cast in the right way. And I'd have to think about it. I should have came prepared to tell you what I would do to change that. But oftentimes, we would have meetings that would last hours. But we didn't have so many of them. We would just go right through and invite people, and we'd have 2 of them instead of 3 or 4 or 5. I liked Tanya, your involvement, frankly. People, and so my observations might be totally wrong, but my observation is people like to hear from people who are in charge, versus just staff. I mean, there's technical issues that you're going to bring your CFO in. I get that, and that makes sense. But I mean, they like to hear that direction. I think particularly budget message is important. As you know, coming up, it's going to be challenging again this particular year, in my prediction. So that I think is really worth you spending some time on, as you do, and setting directions and tones. I think it was particularly good. I liked that there was some folks who particularly suggested that this was not, arguments and there's no bad ideas. Let's just talk in general. I liked that. I thought that was important. Now, saying that, there were some sessions that we all attended that, I had 1 or 2 people there. I mean, trying to figure out, what their interest was. And so I'm not certain how to wrap that around. I'd have to, again, give it some thought. But there isn't any bad ideas. I've seen it done in a lot of ways. I've seen huge organizations who their budget entire process lasts about 3 hours. In and out, you got an idea, tell it to us. If not, okay. And I've seen others who are very, very tiny organizations that they'll go months. I mean, it's very interesting. So I don't know what the right dance rhythm is. It's always different, but I appreciate you trying. But the 2 things that I would suggest is that we put everything so they roll cleaner, so it's not all these awkward pauses, and it just doesn't feel right, And then I would probably try to group as many things and maybe elongated meeting on the I don't call them minor funds. There's no such thing as minor. Everything's important to somebody. But those organizations that are smaller, like a lighting district or something like that. I mean, they're important, but in terms of a lot of invested time, maybe we can get everything in one meeting and people can comment, and if we need to, we can always expand it. The board and the chair have been pretty good about saying if we need more time, let's schedule another meeting. I mean, if there's a lot of feedback. But if there's nobody wanting to talk about anything, just to schedule meetings to have them, I don't know. So that's my entire thoughts.
There's my mute. Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. I'm hoping that I captured your thoughts sufficiently well. So if I haven't, you'll let me know. Other commissioners, what would you like to see changed? And don't worry, this isn't our last stop, but rather, since we're still close in time, it's July, we just finished, we had a pretty intense from the last couple weeks of April in getting the two proposed budgets, the one for Washington County and Clean Water Services. We had to try and review those proposed budgets. We had a whole bunch of budget committee meetings in the month of May into the first week of June. Then we went through the remainder, had the adoption in June, and here we are in a timely manner in July, just giving ourselves the opportunity where that is still somewhat fresh to capture some thoughts. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Treese, and then Commissioner Fye.
This is pretty quick. I just don't want to go back to only in person, whatever that means. I think I've learned, as we all have, is that we get input from people who can't make it into the office, and I think that that's valuable. So that's one request I have.
Commissioner Fye.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. I echo everything that's been said, especially around what worked well from the last budget process. I only have 2 budget process to compare to myself. And I think Tanya and the team did a really great job of pivoting our budgeting process this year and making it more open and accessible to our community, and also much more engaging and centering equity in how we invest resources. So I really appreciated that process. So kudos to Tanya, to your leadership on that. And I think considering that everything worked, what I would have liked, and this is in connection to the feedback and the comments that I've heard from our constituents and residents, is that I've heard a lot of questions about the 30 million budget situations that people have been reading. There was an article and then in our board sessions, I don't know if we told the right story about that situation, and the community had to fill in the gaps for themselves. And I would have questions that was, people were just pivoting or telling the story how that would have happened or how that might have happened. Well, I think we did a good job of managing that in our budgeting committee meetings, and the chairs of those committees did a good job of facilitating that discussion. Perhaps next year, since Commissioner Rogers just now made a prediction that we might be in the same situation as next year, I think coming up tools and strategies on how we tell the community that story of what's happening to their tax pay, to their money, and how we ended up in that situation, and what is mitigation strategies moving forward. So I don't know if it's criticism rather to our team, to our leadership team at the county, or to our county administrator, but sort of a devil's advocate, that the community did have a lot of questions and did tell their own stories about what that meant to them. So perhaps we could infuse in our own budgeting process a bit of a storytelling of how we share our challenges and successes within our budgeting process, and the hard decisions that come with investing, and what that means. So those are my 2 cents.
Thank you, Commissioner Fye. I'm hoping that I was able to capture in notes the essence of what you were getting at. Any other thoughts?
Along that line, I would just like to say that, I understand what Commissioner Fry is saying. I think that there was the attempt through the budget message to do that, but maybe we need a different approach to how the budget message is sent and highlighted. And I'm thinking of a headliner type of thought. So anyway, I'm moving to problem solving. So, but I do think that it was addressed in that budget message, but it's not necessarily at the right time and place for the community to grasp it. So that's why I'm offering that up.
Whoops, I didn't mute and unmute. Commissioner Treese, did I note it? I know it's probably small. I was just trying to give you all the opportunity of seeing the whole screen. The last item here, consider how the proposed budget is launched to the community time and place. Okay.
That works.
Okay, Commissioner Willie, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, Pam, maybe you and I are thinking along the same line there. I was thinking more of an executive summary because quite frankly, 400 pages of numbers is pretty overwhelming, I think, to a lot of our constituents. So an executive summary, I don't know what that would look like. And I certainly don't want to add any more burden to Tanya and her team on this, but maybe we could do that. And inclusive in that document would be what Nafisa was talking about, an explanation of when we have financial shortfalls, such as we did this year, because I would agree with her feedback that she was getting from constituents. They just plain did not understand how we would go from what they considered a county that was financially very, very strong to all of a sudden we're trying to fill a $30 million hole. So, so yeah, communication is going to be very critical in that and going into the future, because our services are certainly stressed by our financial capabilities and what money is available. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Do you think I captured your thoughts here appropriately in the last two lines?
Sorry, mute button. Yes, you're fine.
Okay.
And I think there's, like I said, that's just additional to what Nafisa was talking about and Pam was talking about. So yeah, we're good.
Okie dokie. Commissioner Fry, did you have something more? Your hand's raised.
No, Chair Harrington, I just forgot to lower the.
Okay, well, so I'll finish up as myself, as a member of the board, as a participant. One of the things that I really appreciate about how we have gone through our budget experience these past 3 years, but really typified this year, is transparency. And it touches on during the budget proposed process, the CAO was clear to us that she found herself as the budget officer getting requests that positioned the county, positioned her as the budget officer with having to problem solve a $30 million shortfall. And she worked with her staff and solved that, such that we had a proposed budget that had solved that. And then through her leadership and working with her staff, continue to have improved processes in place so that we distinguish between just what's been practiced and what is actually policy. what one of the learnings that we've heard about is that there are in the agency a lot of practices that people can't remember. Why are things being done that way? It's not a policy. It's just the way we've always done it. And we've moved to being a learning exercise and a questioning organization to say, well, why are we doing it that way? Is that supporting our desired outcome? Or do we need to look at that differently? And I think that's tremendous. So the transparency aspect was clear to me, at least. Excuse me. The other aspect of this is that in our efforts to be transparent, our community now has the opportunity to understand that we have been hearing for at least since 2019 how the resources are limited, and now growth of revenues and property tax is not keeping pace and has not been keeping pace for 3 years with expenses. And as forecast, we've hit that strategic inflection point, that crossover point. Our staff's done a phenomenal job of problem solving that. But what is now transparent to all of us and our community is that for a long time, the proposed budgets were achieved by not under investing in our systems. That's why we have to figure out a new ERP system. We're generations behind. And we've not been investing in our own workforce to the extent that we haven't had trainings, we haven't had career ladders and things of that nature. Things that are front and center for our county administrator and her team. But she has been transparent with us. She's been transparent with the community. We've been more transparent with the community and upfront about how we need to be engaged as a board for our responsibility in policy and investment decision making. That's a big change. It's a change for the better, and it's why I believe we have a brighter future ahead of us, as demonstrated by our ability to learn from best practices, just as we had in this roundtable. So I want to reinforce kudos to Ms. Angie and the full One Washington County team for embracing transparency and embracing those new tools so that in service to community, we can be a more resilient agency. I think it's going to help us in the long haul. Now I have to capture what I just got to, huh? Please tell me I wasn't muted that whole time. Oh, okay. So I will just capture this real quickly under the standpoint of transparency, learning organization, brighter future. And maybe Commissioner Treese can help me offline to capture that a little bit more verbose, but less verbose than I said, so we can get that into the meeting packet. Okay? Thank you, Commissioner Treese, for helping me with that. So any last thoughts on this agenda topic?
I was really hoping when you asked if you were muted the whole time that we would have shook our head yes, so to hear you.
To see me jump out of my skin.
You're kind of mean, Nafisa.
Unlikely.
He's teasing me. Works works for me, Commissioner Fye. Okay, well, if you'll just give me 1 second then, or actually, I don't, we're going to segue now to our next topic, which is board initiatives. So you all have from our packet, oh, I'm going to stop share. Yay, I can see you all again on this monitor versus that monitor. I felt like I was looking at you from the side. I'm practicing what it's going to be like for us in the auditorium. Okay, so board initiatives. Wow, we have a lot on our plate. And we knew that at the start of this year when we formed up or solidified our board initiatives. So generally what we do as a work group is the middle of the calendar year, we checkpoint where we're at with our board initiatives. So you all have in the packet the board initiatives document where I have attempted to reflect back what we have accomplished thus far this year and what we have before us. So can you see this board initiatives document? That's what I'm referring to. It's in the packet. So I'm not going to do a shared screen because everybody has it in the packet. There are 3 different tables. As you can see, there's board ownership, board attention influence, and board awareness. This is the same model we've been using. Okay, so what I did is I filled in that column on 2022 status. So for example, recognizing that we were successful in the ESPD level, and also recognizing that through the May election that took care of the other elected levels here in our community. And we know, looking ahead at 2023, 2024, that we don't have any onboarding of new board members. So that's why I crossed that out. Then we have our direct reports, annual reviews. And earlier this year, we made an adjustment and caught up with what the actuals in the contracts are. So we're on track. We did the 6-month review. We have some additional ones coming up. And so the updates I highlighted in yellow. Under the Washington County Strategic Planning, we just talked about that. And you can see in the moving forward rolling agenda, not rolling agenda, roundtable plan, we'll be coming back to that. I'm not intending to go too fast, but I also don't want to bore you. Okay, pacing's okay. Thank you, Commissioner Treese. We also recognized that there are some major policy areas, either here internally or where we are participants. So the Reimagine Oregon journey, the Redefining Public Safety journey, climate changes, the state climate adaptation framework. All those are happening and moving forward. Then this other category that we had of county levies and financial planning, ESPD, check. On facilities, this is where we have a change. Through our staff, we now have a different model. So there's the development of the capital improvement plan and moving forward with community engagement and alignment with the county strategic plan. And this is information that I know in updating this, I had to go back and remind myself of different briefing memos that we've had with Ms. Angie and her staff. So that's my way of saying, if you didn't remember it exactly that way, that's a-okay. but it's a summary of where we are at now. Okay, I'm moving on to page 2, still in the same chart, and just wanted to reflect that as we talked about earlier this year, the jail capacity is part of that financial plan too. Any questions, comments? A-okay? All righty. So if I could just reflect, we're doing pretty well. So for our board ownership, as one member of 5, it's like, okay, all this is in our planning. But to me, I know we still have a very busy load. So now I'm moving to the table, board attention influence. So this is where, once again, we have a lot of moving parts. There's program engagement with the affordable housing bond groundbreakings and grand opening. Thank you for being intentional about being visible there so that we're doing our part so that the community understands. Promises made, promises kept. The voters approved this major new funding. We're making sure they get to see how we're delivering as a public agency. With MISTIP, we had that as well, and we're proceeding with our work session milestones. With land use and transportation, we'll be having some updates on that later in October. If you had a chance to catch up with Ms. Angie's communication of this morning, last night, or late yesterday. Then we had this set under housing services, and hopefully if any of you have any questions, you're going to help me by unmuting and speaking right up. Housing services, we have accomplishments here, and I also want to make sure, since we spent time on it, that you get the credit for making sure that we've launched, and I have a typo here, it's the Tri-County Planning Body, so I'll correct that. Budget, really good. Miscellaneous, this is where, you know, if we go back to where we were last November and December and trying to figure out what 2022 would be like, we realized that there would be some adjustments with variants, surges, and surprises. We talked about normalizing vacation taking, traveling, and just flat out living with COVID. Congratulations to you. I think we've done pretty darn well. And that congratulation goes to all of our county employees and our employees of Clean Water Services as well. Normalizing hybrid board meetings. Well, we're going to start making this transition September 1st, going from virtual only to hybrid. And we're going to, as Ms. Angie talked about at our work session, we'll have a bit of an overview on that. And then from there, we've already started board members normalizing presence in the building, and with more to come on that. Any questions on that whole category or comments? Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
Well, it's a question that I'm not sure where it goes, but I don't see all the work that you and Jerry, as well as many others, have done around ARPA. And shouldn't that be reflected here?
We didn't initially put ARPA as an initiative driven by the board. Rather, that is very much a part of our policy and investment program as a board in the rolling agenda. So this board initiatives tool is only one of multiple tools we use. But this tool helps us gauge our political capital in addition to our time. Okay, so the rolling agenda and the roundtable plan each help us getting more granular around time.
Right.
But those tools don't checkpoint our own political capital.
And I was just thinking in terms of how the ARPA money is spent and the interaction with other political leaders, that type of thing. I just know the amount of work, and I understand what you're saying, that it tends to be more on an operational level, but it seems like it. I just don't want to miss the tremendous amount of work that I know both you and Jerry have done, as well as others. So I just propose that it might be reflected here.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Then the last table for approaching this, what about our political capital and our time, is this board awareness, meaning the commission needs to invest some occasional time or occasional access at a lower level than the board-driven ownership, at a lower level than the attention influence. So under board awareness, we had that crisis responsiveness, particularly around economic recovery and support. There's a relationship there with the ARPA program. The workforce development, this is the Washington County workforce. This is where we played a role in supporting the ACA onboarding. And we have coming into the future an update on workforce retirements and demographics that Ms. Angie will be sharing with us. Under board awareness, there was a lot of work staff did on the middle housing, what I for shorthand keep calling the HB 2001 code language. And we did that. Yay! I did propose for the next couple of years ahead, you'll see this is where under land use and transportation, I recognize that there is time that is spent on project design, including open houses and construction in districts. Because I see you all as district commissioners, and to a lesser degree myself, spending time on that. I was just chatting, for example, with Commissioner Treese yesterday around the Cornell Road project. And I know, anyway, it comes up in all of your districts. So it was just an idea. We'll solidify later in the year. You'll decide if you want it or not. Then we had some additional ones that we had noted, right? That countywide broadband strategic plan project, kicking that off. Matt Craigie and our economic development team are rocking that. Elections, county website going live. This shifted out to September, but that's an exciting development moving forward. And then as a placeholder, we chose to just note for ourselves that there are some individual commissioner initiatives of note that we hear about, but don't involve the board initiatives that we've not, it's formation stuff, and it doesn't involve any commitment of resources, staff resources in the agency beyond what we use with our policy assistants. So as you know, Commissioner Treese and I participated in that task force on preschool for all. We did that. There's a report done. That external team can continue with their work, but this is how we participated to date. Whew. So that's an update from me just on Washington County. We also have in our updated packet the Clean Water Services update. Whoops, Terrific. I managed to close my file. Oh, sorry. If I could bring to life the Roundtable rollout plan as well. You've got that as the next page in the document. So you see in September 1st, we're holding in person, and we're going to be bringing in county council, and Mr. Carr and his team will be here. In October, Ms. Angie talked about the county strategic planning and how we'll come to that. And then in November, December, you see some of the classical stuff we usually do. The next page is just keeping track. Oh, darn, where is my, oh, I'm not doing a share screen, but the clean water services set. That's in our packet. And for whatever reason, I don't have it up in front of me while I fumble around. Mr. Jockers, can you, there it is. I see it finally for myself.
Okay.
Mr. Jockers, would you like to present this, or do you want me to present it?
Chair, I'd be happy to. This is essentially an update from the piece that we presented to you all in January as draft board initiatives, again centered around the ownership, influence, and inform a kind of format that you have in place. The three ownership pieces we have there are our legislative agenda piece, the CEO evaluation, which you all completed last week, and then our equity, diversity, and inclusion policies, which we continue to move forward and report on to you during our board learning sessions and budget. Again, two other items that have been completed this year is a budget committee and also the adoption of the budget. Thank you very much. We are briefing the board, as you know, right now on SCOG and STAM safety. These are influence and tension pieces. We will be bringing an investment policy back to the board for your consideration in the fourth quarter of this year. And then also providing reports on some of our local and regional partnership initiatives there, including our community and industry partnership strategy, the initial findings on some of our cost of service analysis that we've talked to you about previously, the intergovernmental agreement renewals that Joe Gall is working on will likely be coming to you in the second quarter of 2023. And then under the inform and awareness piece, it's the pieces that we have discussed previously related to workforce culture and learning and development, strategic planning and performance excellence program, as well as kind of strategic industry value, which is related a bit to the community and industry partnership strategy above. Regulatory compliance strategies, that is really about our permit renewal process that we're going on, both how we get through the current permit, but how we're starting to plan for the permit in 5 years. Water reuse, ripple development, and programming will be coming to you as well. Climate adaptation framework and strategies, as you saw within Diane's performance evaluation, we will be bringing something to you in the second quarter of 2023 on that. And then we appreciate the time that we have been able to have with you with board trainings, as we did on April 7th. Thank you very much. We look forward to trying to find some time, half day or so, sometime in the fourth quarter as well as this year. So that's kind of a summary there. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have or additions that you'd like us to consider or put on there.
Yeah, so if I might, this I think warrants a little bit of conversation, and here's what I'm getting at. So in 2019, 3 of the 5 commissioners were new. And we went through some new shared experiences together that did, making sure that the 3 of us who were new understood the suite that is clean water services. But also we had that shared experience of the 5 of us with things like the design and construction standards. and learning about hydro modification, and we had some tours and whatnot. And Commissioner Fye was a member of CWAC. So when she started, she had a little bit more insight than, for example, I did. Okay. And of course, in 2021 and 2022, we continued to transition our work from being focused on COVID and being isolated to getting back to normal business. And our Clean Water Services team helped us by having, I think helped us by having more recognized learning opportunities. And we, instead of just trying to steal them from portions of evening meetings or here and there, I've worked with Mark and Diane to try and be a little bit more conscientious or conscious of those needs. So this is how in 2022, we chose to take one of our roundtables and provide that as the board training time. And as Mark mentioned, doing that again in Q4. And part of what is an adjustment this year is for the last 3 years, we've had a shared, well, a quasi-shared WEFTEC experience. In 2019, 3 of us went in person. Then in 2020 and 2021, the 5 of us participated in a virtual WEFTEC. So we had board learnings together. Here in 2022, Commissioner Willie, as I understand it, will be attending WEFTEC in person. Commissioner Treese and I will be having CWS learning through participation at the World Water Congress in September. And so this is where our team is helping us pivot so that we have that Q4 half day. So with Q4 being October, November, and December, and in November, we have the annual AOC conference. December this year has 3 work weeks essentially after Thanksgiving. We're going to have to figure out how we do all of this. And then I think better formalize how we spread our time across the 2 agencies in 2023. That's sort of a positioning from my experience. What are your thoughts? Okay with that, or we'll come back to it later in the year when we think ahead more to 2023, or what? I just wanted to open the floor up.
I'm not sure I understand your question. Would you articulate it again?
Well, it's not an absolute question, rather it's an open opportunity. Diane and Mark and I spend a bunch of time talking about the strategic needs that they have and how to best set up engagement with you. And that's work that you have the benefit of, right? But you don't necessarily see how much time we spend trying to plan this out so that it's productive for you. So I wanted to give you an assessment of where I think we're at and ask you the open question of how's that working out for you? Keep going, or, keep going, we're on the journey, thanks. Or if you have other specific thoughts or ideas. It's an open question. And thumbs up is an A-OK response.
Catherine, I was talking with, along with Nafisa with Mark and Diane just the other day. And I just want to say, first of all, I think I'm okay with the way we're going. That said, I also want to say that my experience, my learning experience has been really solid around the tours that we've taken. I just find that I learn so much, whether we're walking around Fernhill, whether we're in the upper reaches of the Tualatin River, or those experiences have been extremely valuable for me. And, I find that we talk about issues that aren't necessarily related to what we're seeing in front of us at the same time. So while I recognize our schedule is packed and summertime is probably much more desirable when we're looking at tours, I would hope that we continue with that. And it's not just limited to field trips. It's also looking at at Biogen. It's looking at the things that we've done on site as well. The murky water was a little iffy for me, but besides that part, it really, those experiences and the way that CWS has constructed those experiences along with our discussion, I just want to say in this forum, it's been really helpful for me.
I concur. They have been very rich, very useful experiences. Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Yeah, I want to tag along with what Pam just said too. I really appreciate, Mark and Diane, but certainly all the staff that spend the time updating us, educating us, trying to, in my case, dumb it down so that I can process what all the things that they certainly do. Also looking forward to the Meriwether project. I think that's going to be what a great opportunity for Clean Water Services, and I'm looking forward to see what their vision and development of that project is as well. So yeah, I'm fine with doing what we're doing. I enjoy it, and I just want to say thank you to Mark and Diane and all the staff for the time they spend keeping us up to speed.
You're welcome.
They would love to have as much of our time as Washington County does. So that's why we end up, the three of us, talking and planning a bunch.
Careful what you ask for, Mark.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Mark, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that is true. We want time with the board so that you can understand the issues that are in front of us. We also want to be very efficient with that time too, right? Certainly we'd like to gobble up all your, but we don't want to do that. We want to be effective. Those opportunities that we can have, like we did in April, or where I think that's what we actually got out to get on the farm to go look at some of these sites and drove out there in the buses. That's a way that I think we can feature our staff that know these things, but also get you engaged with some of our partnerships. So we appreciate that. And if there's opportunities like that, that's terrific. We really appreciate it.
Just a couple of comments from my behalf. Mark, I know that we have chatted about making your meetings much like the Housing Authority. That maybe you wouldn't have to hang around our meetings all day, every day, that we would devote some time on specific dates. Maybe it'd be a couple of times a month where it would be very specific. This would be clean water, and here would be the issue, so that you might have the time from us that you'd need. And so I haven't heard that in your initiatives, and I've not heard that today, but I know we all have talked about that, meaning not necessarily this board, but you've talked to me, Diane's talked to me. And so if that's something that you want to consider at some point, I'd encourage you to bring it back. And then how it's going now is fine. There's some huge issues that are, I think, in the future, as you know. And that's, I still believe that this organization should get out of the retail business, some plan to do that. And there are some methodologies to bill cities for their constituents' water, and then they could turn and rebill them. So they would have the ability to permit and to collect and to run their systems. But there's a lot of advantages to clean water and a lot of advantage to the city. So I would hope that work and thoughts wouldn't be lost. And that's all I have for clean water. When I do get done, I have one for Tanya, and that's it. We didn't have in your area, the cost of service study. That's a big part of, I would hope, the whole strategic plan, because quite frankly, that's the issues that are in the financial arena, both in the county and clean water service. What's it cost to deliver service, and how are we going to do it? And so, if that's part of the the planning that you're doing in this updated strategic plan, then you just go like this, and I go, yeah, that's wonderful. And Mark, I'm glad you guys are doing that. It's a tough piece of business, but it needs to be done. So that's my comments.
I'd like to address two of those things. One is, yes, we have talked about, is there a different way that we should be interacting with the board in terms of particularly business related items? We look to the board, we can help propose some of those things, but that is certainly a board's decision, right? About how you want to do that. And I appreciate your encouragement there. I'd be happy to have that conversation further with the board. A conversation about the retail one, and yes, Commissioner Rogers, I have heard you say that before. We are actually looking a little bit right now, potentially to pilot something like that with Sherwood. Sherwood is uniquely situated where, the way we really got to do it is just have one pipe that goes to a city, right? And you got a meter on it, we can figure out what it is. Sherwood's kind of uniquely situated because there really is just one or two pipes that come out of that city into our system. So we're starting to look at how we might do that. So I appreciate that. And we'll certainly provide a report on what that looks like as we move forward with it.
Phew. A lot. Any other commissioner thoughts? No? Okay.
Catherine, can I just respond to Roy's question? So Roy, for me and for the team, strategic plan and what else, rethinking our budget process, rethinking finances, financial sustainability, services, they're all, it's linked together. And so, yes, we are starting to work on that. Even though it's not on the board initiative list, I think that's up to your board if it should be on there, but it is very high priority for staff.
I would, Tanya, just to comment, whether it be on there or not, frankly, if we're going to have a similar strategy, I don't know what's going to come out of your whole issue regarding the update of the strategic plan, but you can't run any organization, whether that be public or private, and not recover your costs. You got to, and so we all know that. And so and covering your costs doesn't mean that you just have a generalized property tax, because that's not, property taxes for commonly shared services where police, fire, those kinds of things, schools. But when people have specific benefits in specific areas, you got to know what the cost is. And so if it's not on the list, okay, as long as you tell me it's in there, because that's been the issue for a long time in this county. We've talked about it before. We've never quite got there. And I'm really encouraged by what you're doing, that maybe we're going to take a stab at it. And it's pretty important work.
How about this as well? Let's pencil that in to the board initiatives. You are right, Commissioner Rogers. It's come up time and again, and it is a key topic that we grapple with. So I'll pencil it into the initiatives list, and we'll continue to engage with Ms. Angie in terms of how we approach that with the rolling agenda and the financial planning and strategic planning. But at least we'll have a placeholder so we know consciously it's there, both for Washington County and Clean Water Services. Yeah. Commissioner Treese, go ahead.
I think we're moving. I'd like to just have a little discussion back at the board initiatives around Washington County. And a concern that I have is I'm not concerned with our elections division or our processes, but as we look at the potential of ranked choice voting, if Multnomah County passes their charter change, I think the city of Portland, if that passes, then I think we have some effects there. And I also think that as a board, we should have that discussion about ranked choice voting. I just like to hear the discussion. So I guess I'm raising my hand as to own that initiative if you're all comfortable putting that on. And it's not to promote ranked choice voting. That's not the point. It's more just to be aware and to also look at what our potential is for needing to do it if the city of Portland goes there.
Could I propose that what we need is a problem statement, right? A briefing, right? Because not everybody's been paying as much attention about the city of Portland charter proposal that will be on the November ballot, right? So you've touched on that. We already know that there is a ballot signature effort here in Washington County on ranked choice voting. And so they have a deadline for that. So we need a status check-in, okay? We're not ready to say we want to move towards that, right? So yes, we absolutely have the opportunity for crystallizing that. What I'm hearing you volunteer is to work with Ms. Angie and Mr. Carr so that we have a briefing on that and can come back to it. I think process-wise, that is what I would suggest for moving forward.
That makes sense to me. I just want us all to be aware and be in tune with what's happening, and the county as well. So,
yeah.
So
anything else? Oh, go ahead.
So I'll put this in a good news category then. So Commissioner Tree's staff are finalizing that information. County Council, A&T, and CAO have been working together to provide a briefing memo or a work session item. So we'll schedule a meeting with you to discuss how to best move forward. Sometimes it's nice to celebrate when we're already on top of things.
I absolutely agree. And if I could volunteer a preference here, I'd like it to be a work session because I would like to have the public be able to hear the discussion as well.
Great. And I know there was a memo we got a while back on ranked choice voting. I can't tell you what year it's been in terms of what elections initial thoughts were on that. So if you could dust that off, that'll be great. Commissioner Willie, go ahead. Did I freeze or did he freeze? Commissioner Willie?
I don't know. I don't know. I was thinking I froze. Yeah, and my comment's not going to be on ranked choice voting, so I don't want to stop that conversation unless we're ready. Are we okay?
Yep, we're okay.
If we're talking about coming attractions to our county, wouldn't it behoove us to maybe have conversation about what next steps are for preschool for all? Because we know that's coming sometime in the future. We don't know any specificity to that. And Pam, you can certainly fill in some blanks there if I'm getting ahead of us, but I would like to have that conversation about what that looks like, because it's certainly not going away. And so like to have conversations about maybe what we see as some issues with that. So
I can tell you, first of all, that neither, and Catherine, I'm speaking for you here. Neither Catherine nor I are on that referral committee any longer. So I can't give you an update because I don't know. That
So
doesn't mean
we did bring it to closure. That
Yeah.
is what Commissioner Treese is reflecting.
They
if-
are continuing to meet, and that's why I just wanted to make sure that Commissioner Willie, Jerry knows that we are no longer in that loop as far as what their plans are. So I think that I don't want you to be looking to me or to the chair for help because I don't know. I mean, I'm not. They're not. I haven't been briefed at all. So as far as having our finger on it, I think I hear what you're saying is if it goes to the ballot by a signature process, what would happen next, that type of thing. I believe that we should have those discussions, but I can't help in terms of what's happening.
If it goes, if there is let me correct just one thing. If there is an effort for signature petitions, our county council has a history of making sure, as was done with the ranked choice voting signature, of making us and the public aware through the website of what external parties are doing. So I'm with you 100%, Commissioner Treese. The underlying assumption that I heard expressed is it's not going away. Well, certainly the problem continues to exist, but it's whatever, there are always external efforts, and I'm not suggesting, our plate's very full, right? And I'm not suggesting that we take on an external initiative at this juncture.
I wasn't suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is that they came to us wanting our support and didn't get it for a variety of reasons. That if they choose to go the signature route, you're exactly correct. But I would also like to think that we could have conversations amongst ourselves, maybe for starters, as to what we could accept, and working with them, realizing that they're going to try and get an initiative passed that ends up in our lap. And so I think it behooves us to be working with them as best as possible. And I'm not suggesting we involve any staff in this or whatever the case is, but at least having conversations as to what a successful initiative would look from our perspective, and realizing that's going to be our individual, our joint, hopefully joint commission perspective. But anyway, I think we know that that's coming back to us, and I don't want to just ignore it until it is on our agenda, because we now have basically a new project to put into place. So
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about that. Okay.
That's perfectly reasonable. The difference is with where I think I heard you say it behooves us to continue, and you don't want to ignore that someday, I'm paraphrasing, someday they or someone else may have a proposal. What we haven't, or I haven't reminded us, is that we as an agency, and I know Commissioner Treese and I have expressed very clearly on multiple occasions with the group in bringing our opinion on the referral activities is that we don't see how a credible ballot proposal can be formed unless we as a board approve and have some county involvement. And we recognize that this board made the choice to not proceed with that. And that is why we've closed this chapter in the book. And the only way there's a new chapter is if the board decides it wants to spend time and have the CAO explore that same question that we talked about in April. So
I guess where I was going is I was wishing to hear not from our CAO perspective necessarily, although certainly appreciate her thoughts on this, but maybe the individual commissioners as to what their concerns were about that and what we'd like to see as a successful project or a successful, I guess, initiative. What would that look like just from us individually? So I know where we as a commission, when asked out into the general public, where does the commission stand? I can at least respond to where we individually as commissioners are. Now, I guess if you don't want to do that, or if that's, yeah. So I don't know what to do with that. It's just my thoughts.
So I hear that you're interested in that. I feel as one of 5, I've talked enough about it. I've made it clear. I continue to be interested in seeing 3- and 4-year-old universal preschool. I understand the situation that we're at, and very important, we have more than enough on our plate for the remainder of this year and into next year. That's all. That's where I stand as one of 5. So now is a good point to checkpoint with us all 5 together if we want to take something off of our plate, because it's all maxed out right now. We're going to spend more time on that after lunch to come back to it. Other commissioners?
Could I just, before we move to other commissioners, I just want to underscore in maybe a different light what the chair said, Jerry, and that is, the decision was situational in relationship to the county. And the situation of the county would have to change a lot for me to have a different viewpoint. So to give you my perspective, I don't know what to say other than to say, well, there's a number of factors in our budget and in our situation that would have to change for me to be able to support an initiative, no matter what the taxing methodology was. So I think those are 2 separate issues to me. So that's why I just wanted that opportunity to share that.
Actually, that's precisely information that I needed to hear. So thank you for that.
And we were very clear in our communications with both the group of Preschool for All, that task force and the initial referral committee, as well as in our report out to this board about the very aspect of the situational experience as Commissioner Treese summarized. Any other commissioners? Okay. I'm all set in terms of what I was hoping we would accomplish in reviewing our board initiatives for a mid-year checkpoint for Washington County and Clean Water Services. Any last things from all of you to close on that? Okay, so before we break for lunch, I just want to preview what we have for the remainder of our agenda today. And hopefully it'll be a somewhat short afternoon. We've got some informational updates and talking about the board moving forward. We have a lot of work on our plate. We also have a very unique set of circumstances. I'm not going to preview that, but rather that's what we'll be picking up with from after lunch, and I'll give you the overview then. And then we need to talk about, or I feel we need to talk about AOC coverage because there are some needs and transitions that we have there. So it just benefits from our checking in and seeing how we move forward from that. So that's what's slated for this afternoon. Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
So when I look at the agenda, it looks to me that we're ending at 3 o'clock. And the reason I'm asking the question is that I have to be in Cornelius for the opening of the Los Amigos Plaza at 4:15. So I just want to make sure that that's the case. So
thank you for raising that. I appreciate having a partner in the time management. That is the hope. This is what we've estimated. And all five of us have a role in accomplishing the task within that estimated time frame. But thank you for reminding us of your departure time. Yes, Commissioner Willie.
Yeah, Pam, Nafisa and I have 4 o'clock TV highway study meeting. So yeah, we're working right alongside of you there on that we need to be efficient this afternoon.
And I was aware that that's why you couldn't be at this other opening. So that's great. All right. Thank you.
Terrific. Okay, then we will pause this work session then, roundtable, and come back using our afternoon Zoom link at 1 o'clock. Thanks, everybody.